Welcome to this third and special edition of our program, primarily devoted to the dangerous situation in Ukraine. The world is a huge stage for humanity's shows of all kinds. Keeping tabs on world affairs provides plenty of scopes for ongoing reports and commentaries from every corner of the globe. Right now, the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan, the dangerous military standoff in Ukraine, the circus-like political showdown involving a controversial prime minister in England, a royal prince embroiled in a lawsuit against him from America, all of which against the backdrop of a pandemic couldn't but keep the world media extremely busy. With regard to the pressing issue of Ukraine, Putin has rejected as unsatisfactory the response to his demands of legal assurance that Ukraine will not join NATO and that NATO should dismantle its military arsenal from the belt of countries too close to Russia. At the same time, though, the Russians have indicated that there is still room for further talks. On this issue, we interviewed Dr. Michael O'Hurley, Editor-in-Chief of Diplomacy in Ireland, as well as defense and security analyst and former counsel at the United States Congress. Just one question to you as a professional and a very experienced analyst of these matters. The debacle in Ukraine, it's a standstill at the moment. What is going to happen, in your opinion? Can you assess the situation?
I think the only person who knows what will happen is Vladimir Putin. He's ultimately in command of the situation. What do we expect? I don't expect a full-scale invasion. It would be a debacle for Russia to try to take all of Ukraine and hold it. The Ukrainian army that existed in 2014 is now a seasoned field force, although overwhelmingly outnumbered and outgunned. Fighting someone on their own land is never an easy task. My greatest fear is that he will use this as an opportunity to move Russian troops across Belarus, solidifying his hold on Belarus now that its leader has shown himself to be shaky and Belarus slipping into the European orbit. And he would use it to move troops further into Donbass, into Luhansk and Donetsk, which would make it more difficult for them ever to be returned to Ukraine. And it would set off a firestorm in European circles about whether that actually constitutes an invasion, given Russia's effective control over those areas at present.
Michael, seemingly Putin is strongly contesting NATO's expansion into former Soviet Union countries that are now part of the EU and that are too close to the Russian border.
I think we have to remember this in context. Russia's incursions into Moldova, in which it still occupies the Transnistria, their occupations of Abkhazia and Georgia and South Ossetia, now Luhansk, Donetsk, and in Crimea, show that it's Russia who is actually advancing and encroaching upon Europe, and not the other way around. It is within every country's self-determination to ally themselves with whomever they want. Putin knew from the beginning that demanding that Ukraine never be able to choose its own destiny was a non-starter. If NATO and the EU were to give in to such a demand, it would essentially undermine their foundational undertakings, which is to allow countries who determine that they want to associate to be able to do so. So knowing that those were going to be non-starters, I can't help but believe that Putin will act at this time in some way. Let me just make clear that I know it's an odd situation, but with the European Green Deal looking for 2030 reductions in carbon emissions It would require them to drastically reduce the purchase of fossil fuels from Russia. Russia's 50% of its economy or more is based upon those exports to Europe. He knows if he doesn't act now, that his economic ability to sustain Russia's horrible economy will diminish over the next 9 years. More than that, he knows that he does have control over Donetsk and Luhansk and Crimea now. He'll want to solidify them. And with Belarus showing itself unstable, he is taking advantage of this while everybody's looking at the Ukrainian border. He's essentially reoccupied Belarus. So again, it is Russia encroaching upon Europe. And Russia remains the only European country since World War II to invade and occupy another. We can't let them get away with this rhetoric. Our European values depend on us giving life to that which we believe, and that is in liberty, independence, self-determination, human rights, democracy, and we can't allow an outside power to determine those limits. It's for us to decide as Europeans.
So at the bottom line now, what do you think is going to happen in the next few days?
Well, the open source satellite images show that Russia has escalated its buildup on the border in the last 24 hours. That's after receiving and contemplating the responses from the United States and NATO and the EU, OSCE, regarding Russia's demands. As the buildup continues, we can no longer believe the Russian claim that this is merely an exercise. It is the longest and most expensive exercise in European history. We need to see it for what it is. And like a chessboard, Putin is stressing all of the players to determine which of his pieces he can most develop and win with. I don't think we know what that is yet, but I do fear that we'll run into a situation that with Russia having partitioned Crimea, Luhansk and Donetsk from Ukraine, the way Britain partitioned Northern Ireland from Ireland, he's really setting up another century of misery, bloodshed, dissension, and conflict, and it needs to stop now. Putin's strength is at its peak. He's shown that last year, with the pandemic, he could move forces in and out of the region to threaten Ukraine with impunity. He's threatened gas supplies. He's using all of his resources, including these naval exercises off the Irish coast, to prove that he is the master and that he's determined to get what he wants. He's not going to get this chance again. My feeling is he will have to act in some measure now.
Thank you very much for your elaborations on the matter, and I'm sure we'll be in touch again on the same issue. Thank you.
Chat for you anytime, and you take care.
Thank you. On the pandemic front, two stumbling blocks affect the battle against the virus: the global inequality of vaccine supplies and the untimely dropping of all restrictions in some countries. England is one, where even the use of masks has been dropped from the restrictions. And it is quite a paradox now that while people are no longer obliged to wear masks in places like shops, the shopkeepers, on the other hand, will more prudently continue asking their customers to wear them. In Britain, the number of deaths may have decreased, but contagions are still high, putting pressure on hospital care. This has been the attitude of Boris Johnson for some time now, the British Prime Minister who is aiming at going down in history as the saviour of Britain from the EU constrictions, the booster of a botched-up economic recovery, and a paladin of vaccinations. Apart from anything else, Johnson is currently under severe pressure, pending the publication of inquiries about his alleged participation in a series of gatherings in Downing Street, prohibited by lockdown restrictions at the time. Depending on the results of these inquiries, he may be forced to resign.